Thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate that you're interested in what's going on. The budget is all about our city's priorities, and having your feedback, helping you understand what goes into the budget and what some of maybe the trade-offs or other opportunities are there is going to help me as we go through some of the next steps. We just concluded yesterday our first round. I think of it as phase one, where we went through the entire city budget line by line, every single department. Some individuals were there advocating for some of their program areas, and that was great. But now we're entering the next phase, a public outreach phase. So this is part of a series that our independent budget analyst, Andrea Tevlin, has been doing to get out with council members across the city and engage community members. So based on armed with a little bit of information, we can kind of get your sense for what some priorities are, because I won't lie, there's some opportunities for maybe some minor changes. On the whole, I have to say, when we were introduced to the draft budget just a couple of weeks ago, there was a lot of relief down at City Hall, because when I first went through this experience about 12 months ago, and then receiving an update about 6 months ago about our long-range projections, we were very nervous about FY19. We knew that our economy continues to grow. We know that we are having a little bit of expanded revenues, but we had some ballooning and ongoing expenditures on the other side of the ledger that was making a structural deficit appear to expand even greater. When we got the news just a few weeks ago that that deficit was not going to be as bad as feared for FY19, that was a huge sigh of relief. Because the last thing I want to do as a council member is have to think about trade-offs between impacts to public safety, or reducing library hours, or other ways to try and affect city services, programs for the community, arts and cultural opportunities, whatever. We want to make sure that we are expanding opportunities for San Diego's programs and really doing a lot more for our communities. That's my goal. That's what I want to do as a council member, and I need, of course, funds to help support us as a community and through the work that I do. So things are looking good. It's pretty much, we're calling it a status quo year, but there are opportunities to try and help to sort of nibble around the edges and try to get a little bit more out, specifically for District 3. That's why I'm proud to represent all these great neighborhoods here between North Park and Bankers Hill and Balboa Park and Hillcrest and downtown and everything in between. It's a special place. We have some challenges. We have a lot of opportunities, and I think we're going to see through this budget presentation that we have a lot that's coming into the community to expect for this year. So I'm going to introduce our independent budget analyst, Andrea Tevlin. She has been with the City of San Diego for 12 years now, and particularly reports to the City Council. This is her busy season, so she has been, they're always busy. There definitely are. They help us in a variety of functions, but I think this is an extra special heightened level of busy when you do get the early budget numbers, and helping us understand what it means, digging into the volumes of documents and distilling it into important and relevant pieces of information, and also aligning. She's got 9 bosses, right? I'm just one of 9, but she's got to align all of our priorities and try to find those common threads, where as a city council, we can really advocate for particular changes and improvements to the budget. So she's doing a phenomenal job, and I'm grateful with all that she has on her plate that her and Chris Olson from her office are able to come out to District 3 and talk a little bit about what's going on with the budget. She's going to start with a high-level overview, and I think we're going to get into some District 3 specific angles and then leave plenty of time for Q&A. So Andrea, welcome to Bankers Hill. Thank you for coming out here, and I'm really grateful.
Thank you. So you already met Chris. Chris is here to push the button, move the slides. No, not really. He's going to give a good part of the presentation, but it's going to flip for me in the meantime. Really happy to see you here, but just kind of turn a lot of people off. So we're really happy when people are interested and bother to learn it, as Chris said. I just moved into this community too. I'm really excited. I live about 3 blocks from here on Curlew. So it's the first time I've been in this building, so I'm really happy to be here. So before I get into the specifics, I'd like to just start by going over some context for our office in case you're not really familiar with the Office of the Independent Budget Analyst and the role we have in the organization. I think it can help you know we're there, and you can come to us as a resource anytime. Basically, our office was created in January 2006, and I was the first independent budget analyst, and I'm still there surviving with 9 bosses. So it was created as part of the city's change to from a city manager form of government to the strong mayor, strong council form of government. The ballot item was developed by a citizen initiative in order to get this change made, and it was a direct response to the city's serious financial problems, largely attributable to the pension problem. And also at that time, City Hall was fairly dysfunctional because of all the financial problems. So the ballot item that they put forward, the citizens group decided that with the mayor as a CEO rather than a city manager, and the mayor having an agenda, which is fine, he should, that's what you voted him in for, is to have his policy agenda, and that all 11,000 city employees report directly to him to carry out that agenda. They believed that the council would need or could benefit from some professional staff members who could help research and analyze and make recommendations to them on the myriad of issues that come before them. And 90% of these issues are issues that the mayor proposes to the council. So what we're doing is taking a little bit different view from just the mayor's view, with 9 council members who all have different, very strong perspectives, as they should have. They come from different walks of life. And in a city manager form of government, the city manager typically does pros and cons and alternatives. The mayor, and this is his job, is to propose what he wants to see happen on a particular issue. So that's what we're there for. And the budget is the most significant issue that the council deals with each year, like every city. But why is the budget so important? And why is it important to understand it? This is an obvious question. But as I said, a lot of people get intimidated by the hundreds of columns of numbers. And I like to think of it as a very interesting nonfiction book that you can go to sleep with at night very easily. No, just kidding. But seriously, this is a book that is laying out for you exactly what services and programs and new facilities you are getting. And that's what's so important about it, without getting lost in the columns. There's always a lot of narrative, and particularly in our reports too. This is our report that backed up that book, and they have 2 other large books that go with that. But this is our report that's 160 pages where we analyze the mayor's budget that he proposed. So there's a lot of good information around that you can have so you understand the budget better. And it's really important to be able to understand it so that you can effectively participate in the process. I think that's often what's missing, even now in this form of government. We get a lot of questions about who do we talk to and when? Mayor, the council, the staff people. So that's something that we do too. So if you want to be effective in changing something in the budget, you have to understand the budget as well as the process. And it can be complex. And the budget tells you what's in, but the important thing is it also tells you what's not in. And if you want to effectuate that, then it's good to learn about the process. The next 2 slides, I'm just going to give you some context at a very high level as to the city's funding priorities, how you can see where we're putting our money, and that's the most important thing. So these slides, the next 2 slides represent the 2018 budget, but the 2019 chart will look quite similar. As you can see, the first 2, oh, you did the bars. Okay. Oh, okay. So the first 2 bars represent the police and fire, and that makes up about 50% of the city's general fund budget. So that's where the bulk of that's where many of our funds go. It's 727 million of the 1.4 billion. So you can see when we're balancing a budget, or trying to put a budget together, and as important as police and fire are and have been and still are extremely important with issues of recruitment, et cetera, it's very hard to balance, and especially if we're in a deficit situation, then no one wants to ever cut police and fire, rightly so, but that leaves the other 12 departments on the pie chart, the other 12 over there, being faced with the cuts to balance the budget. So it's really a difficult task, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris now, and he's going to go through more of the information on actually the mayor's proposed budget. and our review of it.
Do you want me to, there's some more slides here. Do you want me to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Good grief. Yes. Okay, so, sorry, I was going to hand this over to you too early. So the roles of the mayor and council are very distinct, and that's, very intentional. They're kind of a check on one another. But the mayor is responsible for developing the budget and proposing a balanced budget to the council by April 15th. So he's also responsible for providing any known changes to the budget in what's called the May revision, because he does his budget in around February and March in order to get it out in April. He gets another opportunity to take a shot at it if he sees revenues have changed or if he identifies expenditures that he wants to change. So the mayor is also responsible, obviously, for carrying out that budget during the course of the year. The council is responsible for reviewing and approving the proposed budget. The council has final budget authority, even though the mayor develops the budget. Once it's turned over to the council, it's in the council's hands, and they do have final authority. When the mayor turns it over, it's called the mayor's proposed budget. When it's adopted by the council at the end, it's the city's budget. So our role is what I said: reviews and analyzes the proposed budget, develops final budget recommendations, et cetera. So in terms of the roles and authorities, again, the mayor can veto council changes to the proposed budget, but the council can override a mayoral veto with 6 votes. And after the budget is adopted during the year, the mayor's office, our office, the city council all monitor budget operations, budgeted dollars and the operations. And the important thing is, too, that once the budget is adopted, it's only the mayor who can change it during the course of the year. He needs to initiate it and get approval of the council, but the council can't initiate. Their time is right now, April, May, and June, and one opportunity at mid-year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Oh, and this is the chart of the process. Let me walk through this. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to jump out here. So the process, real quickly, the process starts way back in November, and that's when the mayor does his 5-year financial outlook, and that gives the community and the city council a really good look at what he's thinking of, especially for the next fiscal year. We review that also, and we often come up with different scenarios. We might not agree with their revenues. We may not agree with the expenditures he puts in or has left out. So it's really a check on each branch. So during the months of December, January, and February and March, the mayor is putting together his proposed budget with the city departments. But the important thing on this chart is to me, is the tan boxes. In January and February, the council members do their first round of memos of their budget priorities for the year. They each do an individual memo. They send it to our office as a group, and we consolidate those memos and put together a resolution that goes to the mayor, showing exactly what the council's top priorities, all 9 of them, are going to be in this next budget year. And we count on him to read those carefully. We're sure he reads every word. Chris Ward. So then when the budget comes out, it then goes to the council, as I mentioned. It's interesting, with the mayor developing the budget, it's interesting because it's the council, it's the city council who holds all the public hearings. The 6 days at City Hall, the Monday night, these town halls. The mayor does not hold public hearings to develop his budget. He relies on working with his departments, and obviously he gets feedback from the community and people all the time. But it's the council that's really out there doing the hearings. So at this point, it's in the council's hands, and we'll be reevaluating the entire budget and then his May revision, and then the council members will issue a second round of memos to our office where we will come up with some recommendations based on their input or other information that we have. So now I will turn it over to you.
Thanks. Just give me 1 second to reorganize. And now it's my turn. So, hi, everyone. Thank you, Andrea, for the introduction. My name is Chris Olson. I work for Andrea. I'm one of the analysts that works in the Office of the Independent Budget Analyst, and I'm here to give you an overview of the FY19 proposed budget as it stands now. As Andrea said, this is what the mayor has proposed. It's not necessarily what the final budget will be. That is going to be the result of the democratic process over the next month or so. I'll get started with, actually, I wanted to mention this slide is a quote from our report, which some of you have, but some of you don't. There's copies that are bound copies up on that table. They are all for you to take home or give to your friends. Also, there's copies of the presentation that are in black and white next to it, so feel free to refer to that. I'll start by saying that this quote, which we used in the introduction to our report, basically states that on the whole, the budget as proposed by the mayor is responsible. It's responsive to a large number of community concerns. It does take into account a large number of the priorities that were expressed by the city council members in their memoranda. And as proposed to the council, it is a balanced budget. So this slide shows and it's hard to see, but what it is we're making a distinction between the city's overall budget, which is $3.8 billion, and then how it's made up of several funds. So the green portion is the general fund. It's like $1.5 billion. That is the portion that is most of the discussion at the city council is about. The general fund is used to support general services like the police and the fire departments, to pay city employees' salaries, to pay for streets and parks, maintenance of streets and parks, also pretty much anything the city does. The other pieces of that pie, for example, the blue section for enterprise funds, those enterprise and special revenue funds total about $1.7 billion, and these are more limited than the general fund. The general fund is general purpose tax money that can be spent on a number of things, but these special funds are derived mainly from user fees and rates, so they can only be used for specific purposes. So for example, the Public Utilities Department is our water and sewer provider. They receive money through the bills that we all pay, but that money can only be spent on water and sewer projects. So the bill that you pay for your water bill is not paying the salary of a police officer. That is coming from the general fund. There's also a portion, the grayish pink portion on the upper right, that's the capital improvements program. And this is money for permanent things like infrastructure, buildings, pipes, treatment plants, fire stations, and that also has some restrictions that go along with it. And there's another fund up there, the orange sliver, that's an internal service fund, and those are funds that cover the city's overhead expenses, such as vehicle purchases or fuel purchases, and all the different departments bill to those funds to pay for their needs. So as I was saying earlier, the focus of our presentation and most everything you'll hear about is the general fund, because that is where the city council actually has the most flexibility on choosing where to spend those funds. So where does the money come from? This is a slide explaining our revenues. There are approximately $1.44 billion in general fund revenues expected for fiscal year 2019. And I should say that the fiscal year starts on July 1st, so the fiscal year runs from July 1st, 2018 through June 30th of 2019, and we just refer to it as fiscal year 19. So most of these revenues on this slide come from taxes, property taxes, sales tax, hotel tax, and franchise fees that are charged to utility and cable companies. And there's also revenue, such as revenue that we receive from renting out city properties and some other miscellaneous sources. The budget does assume an overall growth rate in revenues for the next year of about 2%. And based on our independent analysis of that projection, we believe that it is an appropriate projection based on current trends and economic conditions. Now moving on to expenditures. The proposed budget has $1.45 billion in expenditures, which is an increase of about $14 million or 1% from the current year. And there's also an addition of 68.8 positions in the budget, and that contributes to that increase. And you'll often see in city documents odd decimal points for positions for employees. That is the result of factoring hourly employees. You'll note, if you're paying attention, that our expenditure total is $1.45 billion, but the revenue on the previous slide was only $1.44 billion. And that is the deficit that was faced by the city and by the mayor's office going into producing this budget. But in the next slide, I'll show how that deficit was closed. So you'll see here The deficit, which was just over $46 million, is balanced using a number of methods. This slide shows the fund sources that were used to mitigate the deficit, and it's divided into ongoing resources in the dark blue and one-time resources in the light blue. And when you're talking about revenues, ongoing revenues should be used to support ongoing expenditures such as employee salaries and the like. One-time revenues, to be responsible, to be a structurally balanced budget, should only be used to fund one-time needs. So the acquisition of a building or some other thing that will just be a one-time source, because we don't want to get into an obligation that we won't be able to pay in future years. So starting with ongoing resources, because we knew we were facing a deficit in the coming year, the mayor requested departments to come up with 2% reductions to each of their budgets and propose them to city staff. And $14.1 million of those proposals were included in the proposed budget. So that is the upper right sliver of that pie, general fund department reductions, and I'll explain those later. In addition to reducing our expenditures, there were also a number of funds that were available to take one-time resources from, and those were funds that have either excess money or unused money sitting in them. The proposed budget uses $14.4 million of that revenue. Examples of that are reserves that the city has that have target levels, and some of the accounts had amounts sitting in them that were higher than the target. So those were utilized. Also, there is the proposed budget plans on using a little over $12 million of money that is in the current year budget that's not expected to be fully spent down by the end of the year, rolling it over into the coming fiscal year. That's what you'll hear referred to as excess equity. So all of these resources together in this pie chart equal $46 million, and that's what's closing the gap between the expenditures and the revenue. So I said I would explain that department operations reduction, and that's what we're going to do here. This is the $14.1 million total reduction in department expenditures. Here you'll see listed some of the proposals. One that's of interest is the first one. $882,000 is being cut from the tree trimming contract within the Transportation and Stormwater Department. There was a lot of discussion about this at City Council because the effect will be to move some types of trees from a 9-year trimming cycle all the way up to a 21-year trimming cycle. So I would expect to see more discussion about that among the council. And then there's also, you can see the other types of proposals that are slated for reductions. These are all important things, and depending on the response of the community and of city council members to these proposed cuts, some of them may ultimately be restored in the budget, or other things could be cut instead. As Andrew was saying, this is the city council's purview to make those decisions, as long as they're balanced. The next several slides I have go through the priorities that were identified by the city council in the council priorities resolution. That, from the earlier chart, is the product of the priority memos that all the council members submitted to our office back in the January-February timeframe. We compiled them, sent them to the mayor, and part of our analysis in our report that you'll see on the table there is doing a comparison. What did the city council ask for, and then what was included in the budget by the mayor? So on all these slides, and in the report, there's a much easier version to read if you want to read it at home. You'll see a Y means yes, it's included, no, N means no, it's not included, P means it's partial. So I'll just try to go through some high-level examples and also try to pull in some of the priorities that Councilmember Ward listed in his memo. This particular slide shows priorities of the council that are related to homeless services, which was one of the primary focuses of Councilmember Ward's memo. And you can see that many of these are funded. They've got a Y in the column, but workforce development strategies and expansions of some teams that the police department has, like the homeless outreach team and the psychiatric emergency response team. There were no increases. There were not cuts either, but they're not expanded in the proposed budget. There were also only partial increases for security services along the San Diego River and the downtown library. Another priority area among all the council members actually was support for resources for the Climate Action Plan. That's the city's plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And nearly all of these priorities were also included in Councilmember Ward's memo. You can see that the funding for the city's Vision Zero program, which is a bicycle and pedestrian safety program intended to increase the number of people that bike and walk rather than use cars, those resources are included in the proposed budget. But there was a request for additional support for urban forestry and a study about community choice energy. Those were not included in the proposed budget by the mayor. Public safety was an overwhelming priority among all council members, including Councilmember Ward. This shows the priorities for the police department, which were to enhance anything to do with police recruitment and retention. That was definitely included in this proposed budget. Part of the large expenditure increases that we have overall are due to $18.5 million in new compensation that will be awarded to our police officers starting on July 1st. You may have heard in the news about a new contract that was agreed to between the Police Officers Union and the City Council several months ago. It starts to go into effect on July 1st. And this was aimed at addressing a very serious recruitment and retention problem within the department. There are currently over 200 officers below their budgeted staffing level. So these pay increases are meant to improve staffing within the department, but as everything comes with a price tag. The fire rescue department had some priorities listed by council members, including expanding resources for what they call the RAP, R-A-P. It's a resource access program. That is a program that deploys specialized paramedics called community paramedics that have a lot of specialized training in dealing with high users of the system. People that maybe call 911 when they don't really need the services of 911, or they could be better served by mental health professionals or substance abuse professionals, a variety of things. That was not included in the proposed budget to expand that program. However, at the hearings, the fire department did say that right now they're in the middle of a new contract negotiation for an ambulance provider in the coming year, and that will be a requirement in the new contract that whoever gets awarded that contract will provide an expanded program for the resource access program. And the whole point of that program actually is to provide a better service for the people that are currently calling and to reduce costs, because as we all know, deploying an entire fire department response to a scene is very expensive. Additionally, there was requests for the lifeguard department that falls under the fire rescue department in the city of San Diego. There were requests for additional lifeguard positions and also a clerical position. Those were not included in the proposed budget. Stormwater infrastructure was a priority among council members. Councilmember Ward in particular called for increased stormwater channel clearing in neighborhoods in Golden Hill, Hillcrest, Normal Heights, North Park, and University Heights. There was no additional funding for storm channel clearing included in the budget. However, they did add a 9-person crew to increase repairs to storm drain facilities throughout the city. This slide shows sanitation and trash collection priorities. Most of these priorities are related to ongoing sanitation efforts in downtown San Diego. And you'll see that all of these priorities were funded. This is largely an expansion of what the mayor is calling the Clean San Diego program. The one that was not funded was expansion of the green waste collection program. This slide details arts and culture. These are priorities. Arts and culture and Connect to Careers were both priorities that were supported by a majority of the council and called out by Councilmember Ward in his memo. The item for arts and culture is ensuring that they receive continued full funding for their portion of tourism, the TOT tax, which is basically a hotel tax that's dedicated to support arts and culture activities in the city. The mayor did maintain funding from the current level to the next year. There's a slight reduction of about 1%, but it's far less severe than what was proposed last year, which was like a third cut to the funding. There was also requests for expanding the city's Connect to Careers program, but that was not included in the proposed budget. Moving along, there were council requests to increase staffing and support for outreach related to the city's earned sick leave and minimum wage ordinance, and there was also requests for some additional code enforcement officers. Neither of these two priorities received any additional funding in the budget. And a number of capital improvement projects were prioritized and included. The capital improvements included in the proposed budget include increased funding for parks, crosswalks, sidewalks, and street lights. Some of them are fully funded, some are only partially funded. Finally, there was a request by the City Council to add one one administrative position to the city council has a shared pool of administrative positions to support all 9 council members. They had requested one more this year, and it was not included by the mayor in his proposed budget. So now I'm going to turn to some of the key issues that our office identified in our report. You'll find detailed descriptions in our report, as I was saying. But these are things that we think are particularly important. Some of them don't necessarily, I would say that they're not analyzing something in the proposed budget. What they are things that we think are a value add for the public to be aware of, because it's part of the context that you need to know to understand the pressures the city is facing. First, key citywide issue is homelessness. Obviously, we all know that that is one of the largest issues facing the city at the moment. Currently, in the fiscal year 18, the year we're in now, the city's providing $6.5 million to support 3 bridge shelter tents, but it's important to note that that funding came out of a program that was actually intended to provide permanent supportive housing. And at a certain point, our permanent supportive housing fund will need to be made whole. Some more detail on homelessness. Beyond that, the bridge shelters and the city's new transitional storage center only have funding for them identified that goes through fiscal year 19. We have no funding identified to operate those facilities past fiscal year 19. So the year after next, if those programs are going to continue, funding will need to be identified to maintain those services. Another key issue to be considered is the implementation of the climate action plan that I referenced earlier. The budget does include $153 million in funding for items laid out in the climate action plan, but we do note that $121 million of that amount, close to 80%, is associated with the city's Pure Water program, which is the water recycling program, which does have some green benefits, but isn't necessarily directly linked to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The budget does, however, establish a new Office of Sustainability for the first time in the city, which will lead the implementation of the Climate Action Plan efforts citywide. Another key city issue is the city's CIP, which is the Capital Improvements Program. That's for infrastructure. Most of our capital funding comes from restricted funding sources, as I said earlier, things like water and sewer rates, fees paid by developers, and the issues with those funds are they're often restricted to only be for certain projects within a certain radius of where the development occurred. So you may have needs in one part of the city and funding coming from another, and they don't always align. So when that happens, there are sources in the general fund, such as the infrastructure fund, to allow for capital improvement projects. And there's also the possibility of future borrowing within the city that would create more revenue opportunities for capital. We note that the funding that is available in fiscal year 19 for capital projects is, the way it's been applied in the proposed budget is actually very well aligned with the City Council's priorities. And this includes funding for streets, sidewalks, street lights, crosswalks, and bike lanes. And in the hearings, some of the discussion that came up as well was concern about the city's capacity to actually complete the construction of all these projects, because it requires a lot of staff within the city's public works department. Even when we contract with outside providers to do the work, there's a lot of project management staff and staff time that goes into that. So beyond that, this is still discussing the CIP program. There are a large number of unfunded capital needs within the general fund, and based on studies that the Public Works Department has conducted, the funding gap between the need for capital projects and the available funding is roughly $1.4 billion over the next several years. And at some point, we will need to consider additional revenue sources to fund these needs. Our office has provided several reports over the past several years outlining options for the City Council to consider, including different ways to raise new revenue, which ultimately means either some kind of new fee or tax, or new borrowing. The city does have a plan to do some borrowing through a method called commercial paper, but the funds that are expected to be raised from that borrowing is currently slated to be used to finish existing projects, which are important. However, they don't address some of the city's other needs, like new projects such as stormwater facilities or new fire stations. Finally, addressing the city's pension needs remains a key issue citywide. This slide gives some detail on what the city calls its actuarially determined contribution. which is called the ADC. And this is the amount of funding that the city has to put into the pension fund every year based on life expectancy estimates of our retirees, also based on estimates of the city's return on investment in its pension fund. And in fiscal year 2019, this amount will be $323 million. And of that amount, $239 million is going to come from the general fund. Our pension fund's unfunded liability, which is called the UAL, yes, the first bullet there, has increased by about $200 million in the last year, and that's due to decisions made by the board, which is called SD-SERS. Their board manages the city's pension system. It's independent of the city council, and they make decisions about what they expect the fund to earn in its investments. So the board has been moving toward a more conservative estimate on the return they expect to see, and also there's new data that we received about the increased life expectancy of our city retirees, and those both contributed to the increase of $200 million in the unfunded liability. Overall, the city's pension fund is currently funded at a level of 71.2%. Other potential considerations exist within the field of the pension. I mean, there could be potential market corrections. There could be changes in the investment return, changes in the life expectancy assumptions. There could be impacts of future challenges to Prop B, which is what moved the city employees off of a pension plan into a 401k plan. There's just a number of things that make this particular expense unknown and variable, and it's completely obligatory, so it's not a friend of the budget. Looking forward to fiscal year 2020, so not this coming year, but the year after, we raise the very real possibility in our report that the city could face a double-digit deficit 2 years from now, actually 1 year from now, and that fiscal year 2020 could actually require even more operational efficiencies to be identified. Some of the factors that are contributing to that deficit that's very likely to hit in 2020 are outlined on this slide. The first bullet is noting that in the next year we will have increased personnel costs related to labor agreements, also including the agreement that I mentioned that provides pay raises for police officers. Also, the payment for our pension liability could change, and also meanwhile, the city is going to need to continue to have to fund all of its reserves, including the general fund reserve, which could require a $9 million payment in fiscal year 2020. Other potential impacts could be identifying ongoing funding for the city's homeless services, which, as I mentioned, currently only have funding through they only have funding through fiscal year 2019. So that brings us to where we are in the process. The mayor's proposed budget has been released. It was released in April, and the ultimate budget authority lies with the city council, as we described before. The council can amend the budget as it likes, so long as it remains balanced. After that point, the mayor may veto the entire budget or any portion that he has line item veto authority. But after that, the city council can even override him, but it requires a 2/3 majority, so it takes 6 votes out of 9. The next steps in the process are outlined here. We just wrapped up 2 weeks of hearings at the Budget Review Committee where each department was scrutinized. And this coming Monday, the 14th at 6 p.m. at City Hall is an evening meeting of the City Council. It's actually of the Budget Review Committee, but they happen to be the City Council as well, to receive, and that's just to receive public input on the budget. So everyone is encouraged to go attend, fill out a speaker slip, give your 2 cents about what you think is good or bad or should be changed in the proposed budget. And the same week, the Budget Review Committee will meet again, and they will consider the mayor's May revise, which is coming out next week, at the same time as the current year's year-end report, which will contain projections for how we're going to end the current year, which then affects the availability of funds for the coming year. So after the May revise comes out, the council members are going to go through another round of submitting budget memoranda to our office, and this is where they're going to propose this is where the sausage making will happen, because it's where they're going to propose the specific changes they want to the proposed budget. So they can identify a different expenditure they want. If they do that, they're requested to find a a matching resource or revenue to balance it. They could also reject some of the cuts that have been proposed. They could propose different cuts. It's really very open. And our office, again, does the work of compiling all of those together, noting areas where there is a majority of support for certain items. And then we also conduct our own independent review and analysis, re-examine all the year-end projections for revenues and expenditures, and we issue our final report on June 4th, and that will include what we recommended the City Council to modify the budget. And it's also based on public comment and just everything that happens between now and then. But again, no matter what we recommend, it's the City Council or the elected officials, and they're the policymakers, and they will make the final decision. And that happens on June 11th. And officially, the budget goes into effect when they vote on the ordinance on June 26th. And that's the end of my presentation. And both Andrea and I are available for questions. And probably Councilmember Ward too.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Andrea. And I bet you this is probably the first time many of you have actually seen the budget and all of its nuances and all of the detail described in such depth. So thank you for giving us that broad general overview. We do want to boil it back down to the community level, of course, and so we're going to be available for some time to answer any specific questions you had. You probably just took in a lot of information, so don't feel shy at all. If you have a specific question that might have been touched on, we're happy to reiterate or go into more depth on some of that so you feel really fully informed. But as you heard from the presentation, there are some key moments coming up, and I encourage you to be a part of those as well. Monday evening, yes, we have an evening City Council meeting, but we'll have another daytime council meeting as well the following Thursday to be able to receive some of the mayor's improved numbers. So we're going to get what's called the May Revise. It's a little bit more of an up-to-date picture about what the maybe changes in revenue projections and some amendments to expenditures look like. So there will be some tweaks to that. And from that, as you heard, then my work begins to try and create a balanced proposal to the mayor. So if I say, I don't want to spend it here, I want to spend something there, or maybe I want to do this extra thing, but I have to find out where the money's going to come from, I have to propose balanced solutions. And whether or not that makes it into the final budget that collectively the 9 of us figure out, we'll kick that back to the mayor, and if he signs it, great. If he vetoes or line item vetoes, then there might be one other step beyond that. So we have a few steps to go, but your participation is going to help me make those final touches, and then we'll be on our way with a very, very busy year for District 3. So with that as background, does anybody want to kick it off or have any specific question that maybe we can answer? We'll start back with Little Italy.
It's not a question about Little Italy. It's a question about John Bull Park.
Yes.
I don't know if that's the capital improvements. I didn't see any mention about Bull Park, and that's a jewel for a city. What is in the budget to maintain that, do the capital improvements?
Yes, so it's actually in several different buckets of money. So some of it is capital improvements, some of it's operational, so that'll come out of the general fund for parks staff or for ongoing maintenance that we do. But we do have a couple of, I think, key opportunities for Balboa Park. In our draft budget, we have a new roof for the Mingay Museum, and that's wonderful because that's actually timing with a capital campaign that they are doing. They're going to be closed in January, and they have a very large capital campaign to really rehabilitate the space inside, so that complements well. We have a new roof going to the Air and Space Museum and a few other minor improvements throughout the park that are expected to happen this year. Yes?
I don't know if this pertains to tonight's discussion, but can you just address the San Diego County Animal Services?
Yes.
To the Humane Society, is one point, it's a contract for the next year and a half.
Yes.
I was unclear about that.
Yeah, so it's another, so animal services have, we learned this year, always been the responsibility of charter cities to implement. And for the last 45 years, or some portion thereof, we have actually used counties of San Diego's Animal Services Department to perform that function. They decided recently, within the last year, to just get out of the business, and several other cities in the county are affected as well. So when we were looking for a provider that could fill the same function, because we were given the county about $10.8 million to be able to perform that service, we needed to find somebody that was able to do it one that had the capacity to do it, but also for somewhere in that dollar range. Humane Society stepped up. We had some conversation recently about how to really improve on their proposed contract. We came to unanimous agreement on what that should look like. It is going to cost just a little bit more. I think we're looking at about 12.5 million. But obviously having that animal care is important for the animals that need it, but also for the public health needs of our community. Had we not done that, on July 1, it would have fallen to our police department. Carlsbad, Del Mar, Escondido, there's like 6 other cities that are joining the Humane Society's efforts as well. Thank you. Yes, Angie.
So I have a few questions, but I'm just going to, can I email somebody with the rest of the questions, or do I have to go to give clarification?
Sure. Yeah, we can give you the email contacts for Chris and Andrea.
That was a really great explanation.
Thank you. Did you have a general question maybe you wanted to kick out?
Yeah.
Okay.
A couple of things. The Office of Sustainability is funded, but then there's no, like the climate action plan stuff's not funded, and there's no green waste funding and community choice. So what is the Office of Sustainability going to do?
So the Office of Sustainability is kind of a reconstituted office. They drew from several other departments and are really bringing everything under one roof that touches a number of these areas that will help implement. So yes, there are many elements to the climate action plan that are funded and are going to be implemented. Some are not. Green waste is something I think we've talked about. I've really been advocating for District 3 communities because a lot of North City communities have it, and I think a few of ours have optional, right? You can purchase your own. I have one at my house, a 40-gallon, but the city doesn't provide you that green bin, so the service is there, but only if you actually provide the bin, and I want to take it to the next level and really get more access to District 3 communities, and we'll keep pushing for that. But on the Community Choice energy program, how many people have heard about Community Choice or followed or know what it is? So Community Choice is a new kind of program about you, the consumer, being in charge of where you get your energy from. Right now you have one choice, right? SDG&E. And for the most part, they actually do a pretty decent job of having somewhat of a green, of a sustainable energy, a green portfolio, part of their overall energy supply. But they could do better, or generally we could do better. And other energy providers out there are looking for opportunities to build 100% renewable energy supply. And if communities come together through a municipality and say, we're going to have a community choice, an alternative to energy supply, and the purchase power of all of us can go out there and say, we're going to purchase through this mix and not that mix, that gives you options as consumers. And so some of these newer programs have been instituted up north in Marin County, Sonoma, the Bay Area, and they're proving not only feasible and profitable, but also starting to reduce some costs for the ratepayers. And so this is a win-win. We're getting greener energy for cheaper. So we looked at that as the city of San Diego for a feasibility study as well. There's a lot of very high-level factors that actually could have some pretty detrimental impact to the success of that program, but we, on round one, looked at the feasibility. Much of the feasibility metrics look very possible, and so we now, at the mayor's direction, are looking at a potential business plan, and that'll come to council this fall. So the reason that that's not in the budget, CCE implementation, is because we haven't actually made the decision to do that yet, and we don't know what's going to be in that business plan. So we might have a fiscal component that we'll have to weigh at that time as well.
Okay. And then I got to just throw this in there. So cut back on tree trimming,
Yes.
graffiti, maintenance, and there were some homeless services in there, but yet the city actually isn't doing any more county bids. That's what we do, right? So we have a P bid that takes care of a lot of these things that are being cut out of the budget that, I know like Hillcrest was hoping to form a P bid. They're being told that they cannot move forward with that because the city's put a moratorium on any new assessment districts. But then we're cutting the services that those assessment districts would essentially be.
So I know that they put a moratorium on maintenance assessment districts, and I'm for the sake of the audience, trying to spell all these out. PBIDs are called property-based improvement districts. It's a newer kind of opportunity for organizations like North Park Main Street to self-assess as business owners and get a little bit more for street maintenance and landscaping and beautification and other kinds of projects. And North Park, after the downtown partnership, North Park is the only other one that recently was successful in getting a new PBID actually approved by their own property owners. It's pretty onerous, as Angie knows well. She spent probably upwards of 2 years managing that process. I wasn't aware that there was a moratorium on PBIDs. So I'll circle back with the Hillcrest Business Association and try to connect them with city staff. I know there's a moratorium on maintenance assessment districts because of some court issues.
Right, yeah, just as if they're still affected, and if we're gonna be cutting back these services.
Right.
Those assessment districts.
For enhanced services.
Enhanced services.
But let's be fair, like we also want to see the city's baseline services as strong as possible too. So when we talk about tree trimming, that is going to have an impact.
Yeah,
Right.
thanks.
Yes.
You said we can buy our own tree bins?
Yes.
And who's picking them up?
So the city waste services, so they pick them up at the same time as the blue bins, so they are every other week. They're not in every neighborhood. I know they're in University Heights, portions of North Park. We can look up your address and find out if yours is eligible. Yeah. Sorry? You live right in my neighborhood? Yes. So I see more of our neighbors are starting to purchase them from Home Depot and put them out. So you can get, I think, the 40 or the 54-gallon green bins.
And just to say, you can have as many green bins out as you have. Like I had 4 out. The last pickup, they dumped all 4. They'll take this month. It's not like you can't have, they can't be that heavy, but you can have multiple.
Okay. Good.
Peter.
Development block at the CDBG. I see there's money coming in for the Connect Bridge program.
That's right.
This is national, federal money. Is this likely, what's the outlook for that?
The outlook is good, actually, at least for the coming year. I think it did note in one of the slides that we are seeing a reduction in general fund support for. Okay, I'm so sorry they didn't hear in the back. So Peter's question was about Connect to Careers. This is funding we give to the Workforce Partnership and others to really connect with high school students, particularly those in low-income communities, and really give them the training and the tools that they need to start to advance their, really give them the first step to advance to better paying careers, better paying jobs. And we make those connections through internships, and it's just a win-win for the companies, but also for the growing students. So we've had a great pilot program through this Connected to Careers program, and we've wanted to increase funding. Some of that came from the general fund that's being reduced, but we are seeing an increase in CDBG. It's community development block grant allocations that are actually going to be higher. It's going to be a net increase for that program this year. So I think last year we we had about 2,000 placements, and I think this year we're aiming for 3,000. Council members asked for more. I thought it was an N or something, but
True, meaning it's not a cut.
not a cut.
You guys asked for extra.
Yes, we did.
He said no.
Oh, he said.
You just said status quo.
Well, for the general fund, yes, but we're receiving more through CDBG. Yeah. Bob.
Chris, we have an opportunity for 2 ballot measures coming up in November, the TOT and the bond. How are those going to overlap with the city budget, or are there going to be things not done if we don't get those bonds? Where's the overlap?
So those would be additional revenue. And really quick, let me tell you what's kind of on the horizon. We have 2 potential ballot measures that may come your way to the voters. Well, there'll be more than 2, but on this revenue question, there's a citizens initiative right now that's circulating signatures at Ralph's and everywhere else to try and qualify a measure that will raise TOT, hotel tax, to fund 3 areas. 1, a convention center expansion. That'll be about 55% of the money. 2 would be additional homeless programs and services. Likely a lot of that will go towards housing. If all is well. That's about 37% of the pie. And the remainder, about 18%, will be for roads and services, for additional street repair. So that is all tourist tax, right? Hotel tax. I think depending on where the hotel is, downtown, mid city, or kind of north city, you'll pay either 3.25%, 2.25%, 1.25% additional. Expected to raise about $2 billion over 40 years. And that would be a lot of that for homeless services we would see on the earlier side. This is very similar to what the mayor proposed about a year ago, and we got into some contention over this. There were a lot of policy elements, guarantees, many attributes to his proposal, which I was advocating for change, and he really wouldn't go there, and so I did vote no on that. Consequently, we did have this overlaid with the budget season. We did not have a good budget year last year. I think many of you remember that District 3 was particularly hit and targeted, and we're working very well together right now. It's water under the bridge. He's restored all those cuts, so we're going to see additional community support this year. And at the end of the day, we do want to see, I think, all three of these buckets of money improved. The other measure that's out there that might be out there is being promoted by a group called the San Diego Housing Federation. They're a consortium of affordable housing developers. They're looking at doing a $900 million bond that would be linked to a property tax assessment, approximately $19 on every $100,000 of assessed valuation. So if you had, say, a $500,000 house, that would be about a $95 increase, much like we do school bonds, right? So that proposal is out there. They presented it to the Rules Committee, which I sit on. I'd like to see this move forward, but at the end of the day, it's going to take 6 votes of the 9 of us to actually put the question forward. You have to wear your policy hat on council, but I also have to wear a political hat because I don't also want to put anything forward that is going to be not feasible for the voters. The second one I mentioned is definitely going to require 2/3 passage, and that's a real hard thing to achieve. Possible, but real hard thing to achieve. Furthermore, I would never want to do something that jeopardized the first initiative, because sometimes voters start to see multiple tax questions and they're no. They just automatically start to vote no on everything. That does happen. So it's I'm not sure how everything is going to shake out in the July timeframe is our go or no go decision, and we're going to keep the conversation going until then. Yes.
Chris, just quickly, thank you for your staff for the leadership. Arts and culture for this last year has been stellar. And Andrea, I just want to let you know as well, I never come to all these without doing something. And so as well. So I think as we move forward, I'm thrilled with the comments on Balboa Park. Certainly that's where most of the members for arts and culture would be residing. And I know the council member was able to effectively advocate directly for the Engage group. And so that was
Thank you. Yeah, and we have, as you all know well, I've been pushing for a lot of attention for Balboa Park. We know the maintenance need that's in there. We know not just within the cultural district, of course, but the North Park, Golden Hill serving, Bankers Hill serving portions of Balboa Park as well. They need attention. That revenue deficit, like our overall city's infrastructure deficit, it does continue to grow until we see a real sustainable revenue solution to plug that gap over time. It's what I'm fighting for with you right now, to be able to have an implementation plan that sort of helps align what our deferred maintenance needs are and where additional revenue can plug that over time. So I have asked the mayor to include that as part of this budget. We don't need to go back to square one. We have a lot in our Balboa Park master plan. We know what our wants and needs are. Let's actually figure out how to get this done. And so we're going to continue working on that. Even if I need some public-private partnerships to get that planning work done, we're going to figure this out soon. Yeah, this is a really, really good thing, and it might have been, I want to say it was buried in there, but it was one of the many things that people learned here tonight. So the Resource Access Program is something that we heard about last year. It was in a pilot form. It was all of one person, but this is a community paramedic who is specially trained to deal with some challenged individuals. Some might call them frequent flyers, people that call 911 frequently. They don't always need an ambulance ride. They are being a drain on the system. And so we were able to really show that for a small investment in a trained community paramedic, the cost savings to not sending out the fire engines, to not transporting people to the ER, to not have to go to all those levels of care, but also even better, possibly directing that person to a better endpoint. The cost savings were huge, upwards of 65%, I think, reductions in public costs. So that was great. And then we were like, well, why don't we do more of this? How many people are doing this? And they said 1. And so this year, collectively, a lot of council members, I think the majority of us had that as a want. And we've asked for, I put a number out there, said let's start with 4 and see if we can build that into this year's contract. So it will be a huge help as one of the many ways that we're trying to address homelessness in particular. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, so there definitely are some more state funds that are coming our way, baseline, so that's great. But we could qualify for even more if we had additional local matching funds to be able to put as part of that application. In 2016, that election, we had 6 counties, Los Angeles, Contra Costa, Santa Clara, a couple of others, that did pass a local revenue measure for housing. And so they're ready to go. There's been some court challenges up in Sacramento on that state pot of money. So I was worried in 2017 that we missed the boat, but because that's been put on hold until some of the court challenges have been resolved, they're sitting there with their local match ready to go. And if an opportunity comes up where San Diego can also show some local resources, then we're back in the mix and we can compete for those competitive funds. It could be, though, that I mentioned the 3 for the convention center, homelessness, and streets and roads one. For the homelessness piece that's in there, it is possible for us to be able to bond against that revenue stream going forward and get a lot of that money up front, which in turn can then match the state opportunities, if that makes sense. So we would not necessarily lose, right? But I think if one or both, certainly if both of those measures don't move forward or pass by the voters, we will lose on an opportunity. There is some other opportunity that I said is baseline funds that will be coming San Diego's way soon. Yes. So that's interesting. So they're aiming for 2/3. However, it is possible, and this is why I think they've chosen, it's taken out of City Hall right now. I have no fingers in the management of this question right now. This is why a citizens initiative group came together, because there's been a court case in the city of Upland, which is like in the Inland Empire, that had to do with whether or not a majority or 2/3 threshold was required when a citizens initiative was the conduit for a question put forward to the voters. There were some broad questions answered by the appellate court in that case that suggest that a majority may only be, you may only need a majority for a question like this. So there's a little bit of legal I think, interpretation that's out there. Bottom line is they're aiming for 2/3, but if they don't get 2/3, and if we put forward something as a city council, it would have to be 2/3. That much we know. But if they don't get 2/3, but are above 50%, I would expect a legal court challenge to test the question as sort of a plan B. So we'll see. But like I said, that is out of my hands right now because we don't want the city council touching it. That would get into a lot of other problems. Yeah. And Bob.
Thanks for cleaning up the street and the big and all that, and walking down the field. So appreciate that effort. On the flip side, a lot of us that live in East Village are very disappointed with the buildings developed up in housing on Walleye Park, which may lay into the restroom use and lack of oversight and trying to place that in land where this didn't work. I don't see it down in that range in budget. So how are you wrestling?
So I have a I did put that in my budget priorities for in January. You're right. It was not included in the draft budget. He did include a park ranger for the river, San Diego River area. I will be really elevating as I try to figure out, ultimate priorities, that a downtown park ranger is essential, especially as more downtown parks are coming online over the next 2 years. And between Horton Plaza Park and Fault Line Park in the East Village, we have some challenge spots, and they need an extra set of security and eyes. I was, as you know, just really remiss with the loss of Halcyon and Stella. Pinnacle has not been a good partner in that on that site. Pinnacle has put a lot of the onus on some of their subtenants to be able to do a lot of the maintenance for the bathrooms, and it's just been more than any average restaurant would ever think to take on. We got the dog park in there now, and that I think is starting to change. If you haven't seen down there, we have a temporary dog park that we think is just helping to draw in more of a community element. More presence is starting to, I think, change the users and just kind of the energy around that space. But having downtown clean, safe downtown restrooms is imperative to keep for public health, to keep our sanitation efforts up. We saw a drastic increase in what the mayor is calling Clean San Diego, Clean SD. So that's your sidewalk sanitations, not just downtown, but a lot of other neighborhoods too. And that is going to be a new baseline level of service, is keeping our sidewalks clean too. It's expensive, and we've been talking about this over the last couple of weeks about all of our homeless programs that we have waded into this past year. The bridge, the large tents, the bridge structures, now additional storage. All of these are necessary components, but until, and you all know well that I'm working on permanent housing solutions and bigger long-range plans as well. But if we don't get serious about those long-range decisions, the status quo, this new sort of $25 million year-over-year expenditure for managing homelessness will become the baseline, and that is not the best use of our money long-term. So we're going to stay the course this year because we don't want to go back to where we were in September, but we have to think about some of the transformations that need to occur around homelessness to both make a difference for our neighborhoods, but also really reduce the number of on-street homeless permanently. Great. Well, I'm going to hang around. My staff and I will hang around for a little bit if you have any one-on-ones. I do encourage you, because they've already printed it and it's going to go in the recycling bin otherwise, to grab a copy of the PowerPoint. So if you have follow-up questions and you want to engage with our office or the IBA, I really encourage you to do that. There's also a nifty glossy color bound copy here of the IBA's report, and that's your line-by-line departmental review that I just had a chance to chew on cover to cover. It was exhilarating. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being so engaged in our communities, and stay in touch, and we'll see where we are at the end of the day in about a month's time. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. And thank you to the thank you also to the Bankers Hill Clubhouse here. If you haven't been to this space, they are doing some wonderful events and programs for the community. The Bankers Hill Community Group meets the third Monday of every month here, I think around 6:30 p.m., so you'll often find me there. We have holiday events here. It's a great space, so thank you again for opening your doors.